Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter, that is Connor, and we are going to talk about Star Trek Deep Space Nine Season 1, Episode 7. It is called Dax. So, full spoilers for the episode as always. So, as we've been doing for a good chunk of this first season, we're rotating through the main characters and getting some insight on them. And I would perhaps argue this was the most interesting and perhaps the most successful of just on that merit alone of here's this character, what makes them different, and some questions you should think about when it comes to them.
It was the most explicitly just this is this character's backstory, right? I guess, other than the first episode with Cisco.
Yeah.
So I guess in that regard, yeah, definitely successful on that.
Yeah, the premise of the episode is that Dax is kidnapped at the start of the episode by some shady looking individuals in cloaks, but it turns out that she's actually being arrested. She's wanted for murder and treason on this planet, but of course the trick to this is that this is the previous host that presumably committed these crimes, and Cisco's put in this bind where Dax doesn't really want to talk about what the previous host is accused of, which makes it a little bit difficult to ascertain like if there is guilt here. But even if there is, should this version of Dax still actually pay the price and face the consequences of it? And that kind of becomes, it effectively becomes a a debate episode, because we get this hearing with a not a judge, but like some 100-year-old woman comes in with her ball that she slams on the counter as their gavel, and there's arguments for and against. So what's really good about this, especially if this is kind of we did have Trills in Next Gen, but this is obviously we're going to get a lot more of it with Dax being a main character on this show. This was a very good, especially if you've not seen Next Gen, even if you have, I think I got a lot out of this in terms of like how I think about Trill and how I consider them as people, the host versus the actual symbiote versus the symbiote and the previous host, and those are the questions that are kind of brought up. And it doesn't even necessarily give you definitive answers per se. By the end of the episode, it kind of it presents all the arguments. You're left yourself to kind of like consider everything that's been put forward, and then it kind of wraps up with a different thing. Something else comes in and kind of wraps up so that we don't have to send Dax away forever, which obviously doesn't happen. So
yeah, that would be a bit awkward at the start of your show.
It'd be very awkward. So yeah, the start of the episode is just Dax having drinks with Bashir. Bashir being extremely forward and flirty, doing his best, and Dax politely shooting him down. Although, because she says she doesn't require an escort home, he then takes that as, but that doesn't mean forbidden, and decides to follow after. So he's on a bit. He's on my watch list. I'm just saying that's just a red flag. That little moment.
He's bordering on the creepy.
Yeah, bordering on creepy with that moment. But once he gets into it, though, it really is very focused. O'Brien's not there. He explains he's away with Keiko. They're celebrating her mother's 100th birthday. Funnily enough. I almost thought this was Keiko's mother when she said she was 100. I'm like, wait, that's specifically the exact age you said at the start of the episode.
Coincidence?
Yeah.
There's a lot of 100-year-olds knocking around here.
Why? Well, living to 100 clothes is a lot more normal in the future.
Which makes sense, yeah. Plus, when you're alien, who knows how long you can live?
Aye. Oh, this woman's Bajoran. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
You're right. Yeah, obviously it wasn't, so she was Bajoran. Yeah, obviously it wasn't Keiko's mother. And
yeah, obviously.
Yeah. And before any smart asses say, yes, she could have had a white mother, okay? She could have had an Asian father and a white mother. That would not be that, irregular. So, anyway, the debate gets going, and that's what the episode's about. Odo's sent away to investigate the planet and see if he can sort of dig up evidence for and against what's going on. So the arguments that are kind of presented is the guy who's like here to take her. He's gung-ho about doing it. He really believes that Dax is guilty. But of course, it was Curzon Dax, the man from the previous, part of the symbiote's lifespan, that was the host at the time. And before you even get to whether or not he did this, the question, of course, that is brought up and raised in front of this invigilator, or whatever you want to call her, is this host, is this young woman who is hosted with this Trill, is it right for her, even if the symbiote is guilty or part guilty, depending on how you look at who's guilty in the case of the crime, is it justified for her to also have to deal with the punishment for whatever this previous host did? And then the debates of, well, how much of the character is the Trill, is the symbiote, how much of it is the host, and it's just really a really smart way of like teaching us like how this works. And it's not necessarily all nailed down with like hard specifics, but it's like, no, this is kind of the way you need to think about it, is that they do form, they're 50-50, the host is still in there, the host still forms this, and we've been seeing hints of this with Sisko, how he knew the previous host, and
how, this is a different person to him.
Yeah, and he makes that point saying, yeah, I knew that man, I could tell you all these things about him, he taught me so many things, I respected him, all these things. I can't really tell you much about this new version of Dax, because I'm just getting to know her. So he makes that point, but it's one of those things where I don't think he definitively proves necessarily that it is a completely new person, but I think he did convince me that this host probably shouldn't like have to deal with the consequences of what the previous host did.
I think he probably goes far enough to convince us, the audience, but I think it's important that it doesn't definitively get that far to the other characters in the show kind of reaching that same conclusion.
Well, I think what I like about it is that by the end of the episode, there's actually something that's not really in the courtroom. It's not a courtroom, it's Quarks they're using, which I did enjoy that little scene where Quark's effectively blackmailed by Odo into giving up his establishment for a couple of days for this hearing. Their interactions have been gold so far.
Every single one of them is great,
yeah. Quark's like, it's business is business, I can't shut down for 2 days. And Odo's like, that wall will need to come in 5 meters, new regulations, and that means the balcony will need to go, and he's like, this is blackmail. No, it's business.
Yeah. It's so fun seeing them two play each other.
It actually wasn't my biggest laugh of the episode, though. The biggest laugh, because before this, when they're trying to stall so that they won't take Dax just immediately, because, this planet does have, like, ties with the Federation, and they can extradite, freely. The way Sisko kind of, like, delays it is that the argument is that because they had all this tech to, like, get through the defenses of Deep Space Nine, which is a Bajoran station, and the Bajorans are not in the Federation yet, this is actually also a Bajoran matter, and therefore they also have to be satisfied before. And the bit that got me, though, because I thought that was smart, but the bit that got me that I thought was funny is Sisko's the one talking, and he says, and the Bajorans are adamant. And he pauses and goes, I believe they're adamant. And Kira just goes, oh, yes. Yes, adamant.
Yeah. Very adamant.
Yeah, that made me laugh. I thought that was good.
Yeah.
It shows how much they're working together as well. I mean, it's just a little thing, but it shows you how in tune those two are compared to the first couple of episodes where there was a lot of questions of loyalty to each other.
Yeah, it's not taking too long to establish a pretty solid working relationship. Yeah. I guess a handful of crises will do that.
Yeah, and they're also doing it on behalf of another main character, so there's kind of like a shared, like, building between the characters. Yeah, it feels nice. So that's all very good. But yeah, so yeah, so I thought his argument was convincing. The thing at the end, though, that I thought was like the interesting sort of counterpoint. So all episode, Dax has been very quiet and isn't seemingly willing to really come out with what happened, which looks a little bit guilty, typically.
Pretty suspicious, yeah.
It's eventually Odo who he goes to see the widow of this man, this great general who inspired the army in the Civil War on this planet. And the reason why this guy's convinced, the guy who's here to get her is also the general's son. So it was his father who was murdered. That's an important detail to.
Yes, this is very personal for him. It's not just, oh, there's a criminal extradition, let's do this. It's this personal vendetta.
Absolutely. So Odo goes to see the mother, and it's actually a really good scene, I thought, with the mother. One, it did a good job of kind of explaining the context of this, and that only 5 people could have like sort of ratted the general out, and Dax is the only one whose whereabouts could not be determined, and therefore that's why everyone's convinced that he's the guilty party. But what I liked about it, and this is actually good, good performance from a guest star who's only in like two or three scenes, is the moment at the end where she, just as Odo's about to leave, it comes up that the Dax that's being tried right now, because she says, how is Curzon or something like that, and Odo's like, oh, it's not Curzon. Curzon died a couple of years ago. It's a new Dax. It's this young woman who's Dax now. And I actually thought her getting choked up and her little emotional, like, oh, I didn't know, was quite well. I thought it was a good little moment. It was a good performance.
Yeah, she's just unknowingly, from Odo, been informed that someone she cared about just has essentially died. Which kind of goes along the lines that she definitely believes
different person, yeah.
When the person does have a large impact on it, and presumably she comes down on the side of, well, she shouldn't. Even if she didn't know the truth of the matter anyway, would have come down on the side that she shouldn't have been punished for the crimes of the previous host anyway.
Yeah, I think that would be fair. Although she's convinced Dax is innocent, and that little emotional beat is obviously a hint that that it makes more sense later when it turns out that Dax was having an affair with her, and that's why his location was unknown, is because he was with her. Yeah. So the easy solution to this is for her to show up at the end and say he was with me, and the son's reaction is kind of gold actually. But so that kind of obviously is going to neatly wrap it up when she chooses to come and do this. But the interesting part of this though, because Dax has a little conversation with her afterwards, and it's kind of sweet, and she says, promise me to live a nice, full, happy life, and all the rest of it. It turns out the general actually was the traitor himself, and he got killed by the opposition, sort of in like a betrayal kind of like thing or something. But the thing that almost kind of lent more towards the argument of it's still the same person to some extent is this idea that Dax, our Dax, was so determined to keep this promise, this secret, to not shame like the previous host. Like that idea of like, I'm going to keep this promise to this woman that he was in love with, despite the fact that it wasn't really her. Like almost lent to the idea more of the argument of the guy trying to put her away.
It does, yeah. Which is why I think it's very smart how it doesn't give any definitive answers in here. It does blur the lines where, but I still don't have a clear distinction of how much is the Trill, how much is the host, right? And I think that's intentional.
Yeah.
Maybe it was the Trill part that was actually in love with her, but or maybe it was just that particular combination, but the Trill part still has memories of that feeling, right?
Yeah, it's interesting, and I think Sisko convinced me of the logic that this new host should not be held responsible entirely. Like, you can't. I mean, it's particularly in this case where it's like a death sentence on this planet for these crimes. Like, under no circumstances, regardless, even if the symbiote was guilty in part with the other host, it's like, well, the simple logic is here: you can't try someone who's innocent just because they're connected to someone who's guilty.
Yeah, and also they point out and remind us that they can't separate. They make that very clear. That would also be death.
Yeah, I think for me, like, I didn't really get a metaphor from all this, really, because so often in Trek you will have one for something in real life. For me, this was just cool sci-fi like stuff. This was just cool. Like, oh, let's explore this like unique thing we've created. It doesn't necessarily translate. The only thing I can think of is like if Siamese twins, like if one Siamese twin killed someone and people wanted to send them to death, but the other one's like, no, I'm innocent, I was asleep, or something. Like,
sure.
It's the only real life comparison I can think of that would remotely apply to this.
Honestly, I think the closest thing would be more like someone like with like split personality, like a disorder.
Okay.
One personality committed a crime, and then instead of giving them help and putting them it was just right punishment for both essentially in this scenario.
I can see that, and that's obviously likewise something that's perhaps hard to nail down and say definitively is happening. Perhaps I mean I don't know if maybe that's not untrue. Maybe doctors can definitively say that now, but it seems something that you can't.
I'm not even going as far as to say that's what they were aiming for here. I don't.
No, I don't think so.
I do think honestly it was, hey, we've got a really cool, unique thing. Let's play with it.
Let's play with this, explore it, and like get to know the character and the rules of what this life this
I
species
think that's
is.
More what it was than any sort of particular metaphor this time. But that's the closest I can think of personally.
It's because oftentimes in Trek there is one, so I was trying to. I was like, yeah, I can't really think of any that it feels at least in my face. I'd love to see in the comments if anyone does have maybe more of a real thing that this can correlate to. But some of the arguments and debates were really fun. Bashir has the scientific side of it and talks about how the brainwaves are different. Describes it as like two linked computers almost that are working in tandem. I was thinking of like that's not as common anymore, but when you have two GPUs in your computer and they're but then of course he asks, well, yeah, but could you separate the brainwaves? Is the symbiote half like still the same brainwaves? And he's like, well, we can't know for sure because I can't take a reading from the old one, but my guess would be probably. So that was interesting. They also interview a Trill who's there to sort of give his expertise. And he's questioned by both this guy and Sisko. So the first guy is like making him sort of say, right, so you keep all your memories. If you'd committed a crime, you'd remember it. You'd feel the guilt about it, even in a new host. And he says, yeah, that's very true. But then Sisko asks him all these questions, and he's like, yeah, but you are different every time. And what was the yeah, it's when Sisko gets himself to be questioned, and he's talking about how it's different. Obviously, he mentions that he doesn't really know this new version of Dax, but he knew the old one. But he's questioning Dax and asks, well, what age typically are you? I think he said this to both her and the other guy, but like, what age is typically a new host? And it's like, oh, early to mid-20s. And he's like, oh, why that late? It's well, because one, they have to be of a legal age to like make the choice that they want this. Yep. But they also have to sort of develop who they are first, so that there's some, a proper full person to bond with.
They've got to bring their identity to it as well.
Yeah. And when he's talking to her, he asks, that you've got a bunch of like degrees and like, I mean, maybe that's not the word he used, whatever the Starfleet equivalent is.
It was like 5 PhDs in like various things.
And she's like, yeah, it's all these things. And I presume all of these things are things that the previous Dax did not have, right? Which is part of the point. But then also said, how many of these did you obtain before you joined with the symbiote? And she's like, all of them. And the way he turns around just goes, all of them. Like, there's just
so
like,
smug.
His point has been made.
It's kind of, this is the point where he's kind of confident he's winning.
Yeah.
And he's like, oh yeah, no one can condemn her when they're seeing this.
Yeah. No, that was all good stuff. You even get a little bit of Sisko character. I mean, obviously, all this fighting for Dax is a good character thing for him, but even like when he's getting frustrated and he finds out about the affair and he confronts Dax with it, at one point he says, if you were still a man, I'd punch you right now. That's what he basically says, because he's getting angry because she won't open up and won't talk about it.
I'm really enjoying Sisko as a counterpoint to like Picard, for example.
Oh yeah, imagine Picard getting angry, saying he'd hit someone, then punching a wall in frustration. Like you can't picture it.
Yeah, he's not that Picard doesn't show emotions, because of course he does, but he tries to generally have that kind of, oh, I'm the captain, I'll be the respectable figure here, kind of keep my composure as much as possible at all times. Whereas Sisko is pretty happy to be a bit looser and kind of show those emotions, like here in when you say all of them, you get he's a bit smug and not arrogant, but he's kind of proud of making his point, and he shows they've got a bit of a swagger to it almost. Yeah.
Picard's got a bit more decorum, I guess, is maybe the word I could use. Like when Picard makes a winning argument when he's debating something, and he knows he's right, and he honestly believes he's right, he kind of like lets it speak for itself.
Has a very earnest way of saying.
Yeah. Whereas like, you feel like if Sisko, like, he's not going to do this, but he almost wants to yell, yeah, I got you, mother effer. Like, I've got you.
It's like, yeah, you know I'm right.
It's like he's got that in his eyes when he's looking at you when he's made this argument, yeah.
So I think it's quite nice, just it's pretty good in his performance to kind of get that across, and I am enjoying him just being very different from Picard. Of course he's different, but...
Yeah, I enjoyed the performances across the board this episode. A lot of them really feel like they're starting to get comfortable with their characters. Obviously, this is the most Dax has had to do in the entire show up until now. Sisko has a lot of good moments. Kira has a nice little moment that I mentioned. And even the guest star had a really good moment, which isn't necessarily a big deal in the long run, but it's good for this episode.
I think it's good in the long run in terms of showing that, okay, we've got good casting directors, presumably, getting, and good directors getting, the right performances out of their actors. No, it's just good insides of the behind the scenes stuff.
Sure, yeah. I suppose it's one of the things, because this is the first one that stood out to me, but I don't know if we've had any like bad guest stars yet, which is something that I would say Babylon 5, which I'll compare occasionally to, because they're very comparable shows, and there's some controversy as to why they're comparable behind the scenes. But one of the things I would say that show is guilty of is that some of the standalone episodes that have guest stars, some of the guest stars are a bit, like there's a clear difference between the guest star and the main cast. Like there's
we've definitely felt that on even some next gen episodes. I remember distinctly having that discussion on some of them.
Sure.
The ship, the colony full of the Irish people. I remember us talking about it on that one, for example, and I'm sure there are other examples as well, but that one just immediately came to mind. It might not even be necessarily the worst, but it's memorable.
That's a weird one though, because you're mixing the acting with a lot of like really bad stereotypes. So there's no.
It was, but it was a bit of both. That like I say, it might not be the worst example, but it was memorable because it had that combination. So far on Deep Space Nine, I think this is the first, properly good guest. I like, really good.
Yeah,
but most of them have been, they've been fine. There's been nothing wrong with any of them.
Yeah, the guy who's like, coming for Tondro, he's actually a face that I recognize. He's been in things. He was in, I think the main thing that most people probably know him from is he was in 24, which, about a decade after this, he was like a prominent character for several seasons on that. I don't know if I've seen him in anything else, but that's definitely the main thing that I recognize them from. But yeah, no, it's a good episode. I actually think it's one of the strongest ones, because it was one of the most interesting ones from like getting you thinking about the characters and the mechanics and how this works. Like I think the Trill as a concept I like more after this episode than I ever have, and obviously there's not been a lot in the classic Trek, but it has actually come up a lot in Discovery and the newer shows that I've seen. So and I like it more after this episode, regardless of that. So that's a compliment I should give it.
That's good, yeah. And I think this is definitely like one of the most focused episode we've had so far in terms of there's not really a B plot that follows through. It's all kind of feeding directly into this thing.
No, I mean, I guess you could, in a sense,
Odo's investigation
is kind of a
technically
B-plot.
The B plot, but it's very directly connected to this still. So it feels like it's always relevant to the main point of what it's doing. It's not, yes, it's a side thing that we're following Odo doing, but it is so directly related that it doesn't feel like a separate plot.
Yeah, it's a B plot in the sense of episode structure because it's something else to cut to, but it's actually just as directly relevant to everything as anything else is. So, yeah. No, really good episode. I like this one quite a bit. So next time on Trek, we will be back to Next Generation, and despite earlier claims that we might put out 2 a week, we have decided not to do that. So we can sort of keep up doing another show as well. I won't reveal anything else at this juncture, but in fact, you're probably, I mean, by the time this episode,
by the time they've seen this, that should have started already, right?
Yeah, but I don't know like what decisions we've made at that point. So
basically, by the time you're watching this, something else already exists. Go watch it.
Yes. But the good news is that it means it's easier to ensure that there'll never be a week without a Trek ever again until we're done, basically.
That's the plan, yeah.
Because we are a good number ahead right now. So next time is Next Generation. That'll be next week. But then when we come back to Deep Space Nine the week after, we will have an episode called The Passenger. And here's the description on IMDb. Rao Vantika, a captured criminal, is badly burned and dies in Bashir's arms, but the criminal's captor believes that he is still alive. So he thinks he's pulling some elaborate death escape, like, fake death thing. Yeah.
I like that from that description. I don't know if they are dead or not. I could see the episode going either way.
Yeah. I'll be curious to see what that is and how they handle it. So that's coming up next on Deep Space Nine. But like I said, the Next Generation next week. They're alternating evenly right now, although that will change in the not too distant future, where they start doing like 2 Next Gens and 2 Deep Space Nines and so on and so on. But we'll get to that when we get to it. Let us know what you think of this episode in the comments below, and you can of course support all the content, like, subscribe, all that stuff. That's help us out. But of course you can hit the super thanks button below the YouTube video, or you can go over to patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and support us on a monthly basis over there and help keep all the content coming. All the TV reviews, the movie podcast over at MailFuzz Movies, all of it. But you can get the Star Trek reviews and the other sort of classic shows like 6 days to 7 days early on early access if you want to get that, specific to these. But otherwise, that is us. So thank you once again for watching or listening. We always appreciate it. Keep watching Star Trek. And he didn't have to in this episode, but I wonder if he wanted to catch the Widow out, I wonder what he would have transformed into. Odo, that is, in her house. Maybe a nice fancy chandelier. It looked a fancy house.